They are words you know by heart. Words you've seen cross-stitched and framed, hanging in a grandmother's hallway. You've seen them printed on coffee mugs, embossed on leather bookmarks, and shared in pastel-colored infographics on social media. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. They are the Beatitudes, the beautiful attitudes. The opening stanza to the most famous sermon ever preached, delivered by Jesus on a grassy hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. They have become so familiar, so culturally absorbed, that they feel safe. Gentle. Almost like spiritual platitudes, comforting but not convicting. We nod along, agreeing that yes, being merciful is a good thing, and yes, peacemakers are wonderful. We've managed to domesticate them, to tame these wild and world-altering declarations into a set of admirable, but ultimately optional virtues. But what if we've gotten it completely wrong? What if these 8 statements are not gentle suggestions, but a revolutionary manifesto? What if they are not a sentimental poem, but the constitutional articles for a kingdom that operates in direct opposition to every empire, every corporation, every political party, and every self-help program this world has ever produced? To understand the Beatitudes, we have to transport ourselves back to that hillside. This wasn't a sterile lecture hall. The air was thick with desperation and anticipation. These were people living under the thumb of a brutal Roman occupation. Their lives were defined by powerlessness, poverty, and political unrest. They were hungry for a Messiah who would be a warrior king, a political liberator who would smash their enemies and restore their national pride. They were looking for a blessing that looked like strength, victory, and dominance. And into that tense, expectant silence, Jesus sits down, takes a breath, and begins to speak. And the words that come out of his mouth are utterly confounding. He doesn't bless the strong, the rich, the proud, or the successful. He blesses the spiritual bankrupts, the heartbroken, the powerless, the ones who feel like they are starving for a justice that never comes. He blesses the very people the world overlooks, pities, or discards. In this video, we're going to pull back the veil of familiarity. We will treat these 8 blessings not as a checklist of things to do, but as a holistic portrait of a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. This isn't a ladder you climb to get to God. It's a description of what a person looks like when God's grace has completely taken hold of their life. This is a character sketch of Jesus himself. We will explore the radical, challenging, and often misunderstood truth of each beatitude, and in doing so, we will discover the blueprint for a truly blessed life, a life that is gloriously, beautifully, and terrifyingly upside down. So let's begin. Let's ascend the mountain and listen again for the very first time. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5 verse 3, this is the gateway, the foundational posture from which all other blessings flow, and it is perhaps the most profoundly misunderstood. Our world has its own beatitude, doesn't it? It screams it at us from every advertisement, every self-help book, every success story. Blessed are the self-sufficient. Blessed are the confident, the self-made, the go-getters. Blessed are those who pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, for they shall build their own kingdom. The modern soul is conditioned to believe in its own inherent strength, its own potential, its own resources. We are told to believe in ourselves. Jesus arrives on the scene and says, no, the entry point to my kingdom is the exact opposite. It begins when you stop believing in yourself. To be poor in spirit has nothing to do with a lack of self-esteem or a timid personality. It also doesn't primarily mean being financially poor, though it is deeply connected to it. The Greek word Jesus uses here is tochos. This wasn't the common word for a day laborer who was simply poor. Tochos describes a level of poverty that is absolute. It means to be utterly destitute, a beggar with no resources, no assets, no connections, no hope of survival apart from the charity of another. It's the crouched figure in the alleyway, completely dependent on the next person who walks by. To be poor in spirit, then, is to come before God with that same posture of absolute spiritual bankruptcy. It is to arrive at the end of yourself. It's the soul-crushing, ego-shattering realization that you bring nothing to the table. You have no spiritual currency. Your good deeds are tainted, your willpower is fickle, your righteousness is, as the prophet Isaiah said, like filthy rags. It is the opposite of the self-assured Pharisee in Jesus' parable who prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people. Instead, it is the tax collector, standing at a distance, unable to even look up to heaven, who beats his breast and says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That is the cry of the tochos. That is poverty of spirit. It's an honest assessment of our desperate need. It's admitting you are utterly and completely lost without God. And why is this the first blessing? Because until you are empty, you cannot be filled. Until you see your own need, you will never truly value God's provision. Pride is the ultimate barrier to grace. The person who believes they are spiritually comfortable, or doing just fine, has no room for the kingdom of heaven. They're full of themselves. The kingdom of heaven is a gift, and you cannot give a gift to someone whose hands are already clenched tight, full of their own accomplishments. Jesus himself, though divine, modeled this posture. In his incarnation, he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, Philippians 2 verse 7. He constantly declared his dependence on the Father, saying, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing." John 5 verse 19. He lived a life of perfect reliance. So, how do we live this in a world that worships self-reliance? It means we stop pretending. We stop curating our spiritual image. We approach prayer not with a resume of our achievements, but with the honest plea of a beggar. In a business meeting, it means valuing God's wisdom over our own cleverness. In a conflict, it means admitting our own contribution to the problem before pointing fingers. It is a daily, moment-by-moment surrender of our illusion of control. And look at the promise. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's not theirs will be. It's theirs is. The moment you declare your spiritual bankruptcy, you are handed the keys to the kingdom. Not as a future reward, but as a present reality. The very second you admit you have nothing, God gives you everything. This is the great reversal. This is the entry gate, and it leads directly to the next, seemingly sorrowful step. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Matthew 5 verse 4. This feels like a contradiction. How can blessing be found in sorrow? Our world certainly doesn't think so. Its beatitude is, blessed are the happy. Blessed are the positive thinkers, the optimists, those who numb their pain and avoid discomfort, for they shall find distraction. We have a multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to helping us escape mourning, through entertainment, medication, positive affirmations, and the relentless pursuit of pleasure. We are taught that mourning is a problem to be solved, a weakness to be overcome as quickly as possible. Jesus sits on the hillside and says that mourning is not a detour from the blessed life, it is a pathway to it. But what kind of mourning is he talking about? The Greek word is pentheo, and it signifies a deep, intense, visceral grief. This isn't a fleeting sadness. This is the kind of grief that takes your breath away, the sorrow you feel at the graveside of a loved one. It's a profound and powerful lament. While this certainly includes the natural sorrow of loss in a fallen world, Jesus is pointing to something even deeper. The mourning that follows poverty of spirit. When you finally see your own spiritual bankruptcy, the first beatitude, the honest response is not celebration but grief. You begin to mourn over your own sin. Not just the big, obvious mistakes, but the subtle sins of pride, selfishness, envy, and apathy that you previously ignored or excused. You see the gap between who you are and who God created you to be, and it breaks your heart. This is the mourning of King David in Psalm 51 after his catastrophic failure with Bathsheba, crying out, "Against you, you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight." It's the mourning of the Apostle Paul, who called himself the chief of sinners. It's not self-pity, it's godly sorrow. 2 Corinthians 7 verse 10 says, "Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death." But this blessed mourning extends beyond ourselves. Once our eyes are open to our own brokenness, we begin to see the brokenness of the world with new clarity. We start to mourn over the injustice, the greed, the violence, the suffering that grieves the heart of God. We are no longer numb or indifferent. We weep with those who weep. We mourn the spiritual blindness of our culture, the devastation of war, the exploitation of the poor. Our hearts break for the things that break God's heart. This kind of mourning is a powerful catalyst. It is the fuel for compassion and the engine for justice. It's what drove William Wilberforce to spend his life fighting the slave trade. It's what drove Mother Teresa into the slums of Calcutta. They didn't just see a problem, they mourned over it. And the promise to those who mourn in this way is exquisitely beautiful, for they will be comforted. The comfort offered here is not a shallow there, it will all be okay. The Greek word is parakaleo, which is related to the word for the Holy Spirit, the Paraclete, the Comforter, the one called alongside to help. This promise means that in the midst of our deepest grief over our sin and the world's pain, God himself draws near. He doesn't eliminate the cause of our mourning, not yet. But he enters into it with us. He shares our sorrow and, through his presence, begins a deep and profound work of healing and restoration. The world offers distraction from pain. God offers his presence in our pain. And that divine comfort is infinitely more real and lasting than any fleeting happiness the world can provide. It is the comfort that prepares us to inherit the earth, but not in the way we expect. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Matthew 5 verse 5. If there is one beatitude that feels completely alien to our modern sensibilities, it is this one. Meekness. The word itself sounds weak, timid, passive. It conjures images of a doormat, someone spineless and easily pushed around. The world's beatitude is loud and clear. Blessed are the strong. Blessed are the assertive, the powerful, the ambitious, for they shall take the earth. In our culture, meekness is a liability. Ambition is a virtue. We are taught to project strength, to seize control, to make our own way. Jesus stands this entire worldview on its head. He says the meek, the gentle, the humble, are the ones who will ultimately own everything. To understand this, we must rescue the word meek from its modern, weakened definition. The Greek word is praus. In ancient Greece, this word was used to describe a powerful warhorse that had been trained and domesticated. The horse had lost none of its strength, its power, or its spirit, but its power was now perfectly submitted to the will of its rider. It was power under control. Praus was also used to describe a soothing medicine or a gentle breeze, things that have a powerful effect, but in a gentle, non-violent way. Meekness, therefore, is not weakness, it is bridled strength. It is a person who has power, rights, and abilities, but willingly places them in submission to God. It's the refusal to be self-assertive and demanding. It's a gentle and trusting spirit, even in the face of injustice. The meek person knows their rights, but they are willing to yield them for the sake of God's kingdom and the good of others. They are not easily provoked, because their identity is not wrapped up in their own ego or reputation. Their security is in God alone, who is the ultimate example of meekness. Jesus himself. He said in Matthew 11 verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, praus, and humble in heart." Think of his power. He could command legions of angels. He could calm storms with a word. He could heal the sick and raise the dead. Yet, when he was insulted, he did not retaliate. When he was falsely accused, he remained silent. When he was arrested, tortured, and crucified, he willingly laid down his immense power. As Peter wrote, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. 1 Peter 2:23. That is not weakness. That is the ultimate display of power under control. The story of Martin Luther King Jr. provides a modern echo of this principle. He led a movement of immense moral and spiritual power, yet he insisted on the path of nonviolent resistance. He and his followers endured beatings, imprisonment, and death threats without retaliating in kind. This wasn't passivity, it was an act of profound, bridled strength, a meekness that exposed the brutality of their oppressors and ultimately changed a nation. And the promise is staggering, for they will inherit the earth. The powerful, the aggressive, the tyrants who claw and fight for their piece of the earth, they will hold it for a moment, and then it will turn to dust in their hands. Their kingdoms are temporary, but the meek, those who have surrendered their will to God, are promised the whole thing. They will receive the new heavens and the new earth, not as conquerors who seized it, but as beloved children receiving an inheritance from their Father. The one who lets go of their right to control their little corner of the world is promised the keys to the entire cosmos. This is the divine economy. It is only when we surrender our claim to the earth that we are given it as a gift. And this leads us to what we should desire most. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Matthew 5 verse 6, hunger and thirst. These are not mild appetites. Jesus isn't talking about the feeling you get when you've missed a snack. In the arid climate of the ancient Near East, hunger and thirst were visceral, life-or-death realities. He's talking about a desperate, all-consuming craving. The kind of thirst that makes your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth. The kind of hunger that gnaws at your insides until you can think of nothing else. What is our world hungry for? Its beatitude is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for success, for pleasure, for fame, for wealth, for personal fulfillment, for they shall be distracted. We are a culture defined by our appetites, for more stuff, more experiences, more validation. We are constantly seeking to fill an inner void with things that can never truly satisfy. Jesus presents a different object for our deepest cravings, righteousness. But what does righteousness mean here? The Greek word dikaiosine is rich and multifaceted. It means, first and foremost, a right standing with God. It's a hunger for personal holiness, a desperate desire to be free from the sin that entangles us and to live a life that is pleasing to God. The person who hungers for righteousness is not content with their spiritual status quo. They are not self-satisfied. They feel the profound ache of their own unholiness and long to be more like Christ. But it doesn't stop there. In the biblical worldview, righteousness is not just a private, internal state. It is also about public justice. It is a hunger to see God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The person who hungers for dikaiosine is deeply pained by the injustice in the world. They hunger to see the oppressed set free, the corrupt brought to justice, the poor cared for, and broken systems made right. Their heart aches for the world to reflect the perfect justice and goodness of God. This is a far cry from a polite wish to be a good person. This is a passionate, driving force. It's the hunger that motivated Abraham Lincoln to wrestle with the moral stain of slavery. It's the thirst that drove Dietrich Bonhoeffer to stand against the Nazi regime, even at the cost of his own life. They saw the chasm between the world as it was and the world as it ought to be, and that vision created an unquenchable fire in their souls. Jesus himself embodied this hunger. He was driven by a passion for his Father's house, cleansing the temple of its corruption. He consistently challenged the unjust social and religious structures of his day. And his entire life was an act of bringing God's righteousness to humanity, culminating in the cross, where he became our righteousness so that we could have a right standing with God. And the promise to those who have this all-consuming craving is simple and absolute, for they will be filled. Or, as some translations put it, they will be satisfied. In a world where every other appetite, once fed, just returns stronger and more demanding, Jesus promises a satisfaction that is deep and lasting. He who is the bread of life and the source of living water promises to completely and utterly satisfy the deepest longing of the human soul. Those who hunger for God and his justice will find in him the only feast that truly fills. And when you are filled with God's righteousness, it naturally overflows in how you treat others. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Matthew 5 verse 7, mercy. It's a concept we admire, but one our world struggles to practice. The world's beatitude often sounds more like this. Blessed are the strong who demand their rights. Blessed are those who get even, who hold grudges, who protect themselves at all costs, for they shall not be taken advantage of. Our default setting is often justice, or what we perceive as justice. An eye for an eye. You get what you deserve. Jesus proposes a radical alternative. To be merciful is to go beyond the demands of justice. Justice is getting what you deserve. Mercy is not getting the punishment you deserve. Grace is getting a gift you don't deserve. The merciful person operates in the realm of mercy and grace. The Greek word for merciful is alemon, and it's about more than just a feeling of pity. It is compassion in action. It involves seeing a need and actively doing something to alleviate the suffering, whether that suffering was self-inflicted or not. It's about having a heart that is tender and forgiving. The merciful person does two things. First, they are forgiving of the faults of others. They don't keep a meticulous record of wrongs. They are quick to pardon, slow to anger. They release others from the debts they owe them, whether those debts are emotional, financial, or relational. Second, they are actively compassionate towards those who are suffering. They see the homeless person, the refugee, the lonely neighbor, the struggling coworker, and their heart moves them to act. They give their time, their resources, their presence to help those in need, without asking if they deserve it. Jesus tells a powerful parable in Matthew 18 about an unmerciful servant. A servant who owes his king an impossibly large debt, 10,000 talents, billions in today's money, is shown mercy and has his entire debt canceled. That same servant then goes out, finds a man who owes him a few dollars, and has him thrown in prison until he can pay. The king is furious, and he hands the unmerciful servant over to be tortured. The point is terrifyingly clear. We cannot receive the immeasurable mercy of God and then turn around and withhold mercy from others. The ultimate example is God the Father himself, who is described as rich in mercy. He saw humanity suffering and in debt because of our sin, and instead of demanding justice, he sent his Son to pay the debt we could never pay. Jesus' entire life was an act of mercy, healing the sick, touching the unclean, eating with sinners, and ultimately dying for his enemies. A profound modern story of mercy is that of Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch Christian who was sent to a Nazi concentration camp for hiding Jews. After the war, she traveled the world speaking about forgiveness. One evening, after a speech in Germany, a man came forward to greet her. She recognized him instantly as one of the cruelest guards from the Ravensbrück camp. He told her he had become a Christian and asked for her forgiveness. He extended his hand. Corrie stood frozen, the memory of the suffering he caused flooding back. She wrote that she could not raise her arm. She prayed silently, "Jesus, I cannot forgive him. Give me your forgiveness." In that moment, she said, a warmth flowed through her, and she was able to take his hand and say, "I forgive you, brother, with all my heart." That is mercy in action, and the promise is a perfect echo of the blessing itself. For they will be shown mercy. This is a divine principle of sowing and reaping. The measure of mercy you give out is the measure you will receive, both from others and, most importantly, from God on the day of judgment. If you want to live under the flow of God's mercy, you must become a conduit of that mercy to others. This isn't about earning salvation. It's about demonstrating that God's saving mercy has truly transformed your heart. And a heart transformed by mercy becomes pure. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Matthew 5 verse 8, purity of heart. This sounds impossibly daunting. Does it mean being morally perfect, sinlessly perfect? If so, who could ever attain this blessing? The world, for its part, has a different focus. Its beatitude might be, "Blessed are the clever, the strategic, the image-conscious, for they will succeed." The world is often more concerned with outward appearance and reputation than with the inner state of the soul. It values a polished exterior over a pure interior. Jesus, as always, directs our attention inward, to the very core of our being, the heart. In the Bible, the heart is not just the seat of emotion. It's the control center of the entire person. It's the source of your thoughts, your will, your desires, your motivations. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, Jesus said. So to be pure in heart is to have an inner life that is clean, whole, and undivided. The Greek word for pure, katharos, is where we get our word catharsis. It means to be clean, unmixed, unadulterated. A pure heart is not a perfect heart, but an undivided one. It is a heart whose primary allegiance, whose core motivation is singular, to love and please God. It's the opposite of a divided heart, which tries to serve both God and money, or God and personal ambition, or God and reputation. The pure in heart are people of integrity. Their inner reality matches their outer profession. There is no hypocrisy, no hidden agenda, no duplicity. Their motives are clean. King David, a man who knew the agony of a defiled heart, prayed in Psalm 51, "Create in me a pure heart, O God." He understood that purity wasn't something he could achieve on his own. It was a divine work of creation. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard famously defined purity of heart as to one thing. The pure in heart are those whose lives are oriented around a single, holy passion for God. This is a profound challenge in our age of distraction. Our hearts are constantly being pulled in 1,000 different directions by competing desires and loyalties. Purity of heart requires a ruthless editing of our inner world. It means guarding what we look at, what we listen to, and what we meditate on. It means confessing sin quickly and honestly, allowing God's grace to continually wash us clean. Jesus, of course, is the only human to have ever lived with a perfectly pure heart. His devotion to the Father was absolute and singular. He could say, "I always do what pleases him." There was no shadow of a divided motive in him. And the promise for this inner integrity is the most breathtaking of all. For they will see God. This has both a present and a future fulfillment. In the present, the pure in heart begin to perceive God's presence and work in the world around them. The fog of selfishness and sin clears from their spiritual vision, and they start to see His hand in their lives, in nature, in the lives of others. But ultimately, this is a promise of the beatific vision, that in the age to come, they will see God face to face in all His glory. The intimate communion with God that was lost in the Garden of Eden will be restored. Only the pure in heart can truly see the holy God. And when you see God clearly, you are compelled to bring His peace into a broken world. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Matthew 5 verse 9, everyone loves peace. But not everyone is a peacemaker. There's a crucial difference. The world's beatitude is often, "Blessed are the peacekeepers." Blessed are those who avoid conflict, who keep their opinions to themselves, who don't rock the boat, for they shall have an easy life. Peacekeeping is about avoiding trouble. It's a passive stance. Jesus doesn't bless the peacekeepers. He blesses the peacemakers. This is an active, engaged, and often costly role. The Greek word irenapoios literally means peace doer or peace builder. It's a compound word that implies active construction. Peacemakers don't just enjoy peace when they find it, they create it where it doesn't exist. They run toward conflict, not away from it. They work to reconcile estranged parties. They build bridges over chasms of hostility and misunderstanding. This is incredibly difficult work. It requires courage, wisdom, patience, and a willingness to absorb hostility from both sides. A true peacemaker is often the one who gets wounded in the process of bringing two warring factions together. There are two dimensions to this peacemaking. First, it is about reconciling people to people. In a family torn apart by bitterness, the peacemaker initiates the hard conversation. In a workplace filled with gossip and division, the peacemaker speaks truth with grace. In a world polarized by politics and ideology, the peacemaker refuses to demonize the other side and seeks common ground and understanding. But the ultimate act of peacemaking is reconciling people to God. The greatest source of conflict in the universe is the hostility between sinful humanity and a holy God. The ultimate peacemakers are those who share the gospel, the good news that through Jesus Christ, we can be reconciled to God. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5, God reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. God himself is the ultimate peacemaker. He saw a world at war with him, and, instead of destroying it, he sent his Son on the ultimate peace mission. Jesus is called the Prince of Peace. He made peace through the blood of his cross, Colossians 1 verse 20, absorbing the full wrath of God's justice so that we, his enemies, could be brought near and called his friends. To be a peacemaker, then, is to join God in his family business. It is to do the work that is closest to his heart. And so the promise is deeply fitting, for they will be called children of God. In that culture, to be called the son or child of someone meant that you bore the family likeness. You acted like your father. When we actively work to create peace and reconciliation, we are demonstrating a clear family resemblance to our Heavenly Father. The world looks at us and sees a reflection of the God of peace. There is no higher title. But this kind of life, a life that so perfectly reflects the character of God, will inevitably clash with the values of a world that is at war with God. And that leads to the final, sobering beatitude. Blessed are the persecuted. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Matthew 5 verses 10 to 12. This is the shocking climax. It's the one blessing no one wants. To be poor in spirit, to mourn, to be meek. These are difficult postures, but to be persecuted? To be insulted, attacked, and slandered? How can that possibly be a blessing? The world's beatitude is the polar opposite. Blessed are the popular, the accepted, the admired, for they shall have influence and security. We are wired to seek approval and avoid rejection at all costs. Jesus ends his list of blessings with a guarantee that if you truly live out the first 7, this 8th one is inevitable. A life of spiritual poverty, godly grief, meekness, hunger for justice, mercy, purity, and peacemaking is so radically countercultural that it will, by its very nature, provoke a reaction from a world that loves darkness and hates the light. But notice the crucial qualifier. This is not a blessing for those who are persecuted for any reason. It's not about being persecuted because you are obnoxious or abrasive or foolish. The blessing is for those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake and because of me. The persecution comes precisely because your life is a reflection of the character and claims of Jesus Christ. Your integrity exposes the world's corruption. Your mercy exposes its cruelty. Your standard of righteousness exposes its sin. This persecution can take many forms. It can be the overt, violent persecution faced by Christians in many parts of the world. But it can also be more subtle. It can be the snide remarks from colleagues when you refuse to cut corners. It can be the social ostracism you face for holding to a biblical sexual ethic. It can be the accusation of being judgmental when you speak of sin and repentance, or being narrow-minded for claiming Jesus is the only way to God. It can be the slander and lies spread about you simply because your life makes others uncomfortable. Jesus tells his followers to expect this. If the world hates you, he said, keep in mind that it hated me first. A disciple is not above their master. The same world that crowned Jesus with thorns will not crown his followers with roses. But then he says something utterly insane. He says our response to this persecution should not be fear or self-pity or anger. It should be joy. Rejoice and be glad. Why? Because persecution is a confirmation that you belong to him. It's evidence that you are living a life of authentic faith. It aligns you with the noble heritage of the prophets, who spoke God's truth to a rebellious world and suffered for it. And most of all, it points to an eternal reality, because great is your reward in heaven. This world is not the end of the story. Its approval is fleeting, and its rewards are temporary. The joy comes from knowing that you are trading the temporary applause of men for the eternal welcome of God. The portrait of a disciple. So we stand at the end of this journey up the mountain, and we see that these are not 8 separate rules for a better life. They are not 8 different types of blessed people. They are a single composite portrait. They are 8 windows into one heart, the heart of a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. It begins with poverty of spirit, the humble recognition of our need for God. This leads to mourning, a deep sorrow over our sin and the brokenness of the world. This sorrow cultivates meekness, a gentle spirit that submits its strength to God. From that place of submission grows a deep hunger and thirst for righteousness, a desire to see God's will done in us and in the world. A heart that longs for righteousness will naturally be merciful, extending compassion to others as it has been received from God. This flow of mercy purifies the heart, creating a purity of motive and an undivided devotion. A pure heart then becomes an agent of reconciliation, a peacemaker in a hostile world. And a life lived this way will inevitably face opposition, leading to the honor of being persecuted for the sake of Christ. This is not a checklist to achieve. It is a description of what the grace of God produces in a human life. It is ultimately a perfect portrait of Jesus himself. He was poor in spirit, dependent on his Father. He was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He was meek and humble. He hungered for righteousness. He was the embodiment of mercy. His heart was perfectly pure. He is the Prince of Peace. And he was persecuted and crucified. The Beatitudes are an invitation. They are an invitation to stop chasing the world's definition of blessed and to embrace the beautiful, upside-down life of the kingdom. It's a call to a transformed character, a life that looks less like the world and more like Jesus. So let me ask you, as we leave this hillside, which of these Beatitudes is God's Spirit pressing upon your heart today? Where is he inviting you to a deeper transformation? Don't try to master all 8 at once. Just choose one. Perhaps it's the call to mourn over a sin you've been ignoring, or to practice meekness in a relationship where you've been demanding your way, or to be a peacemaker in a conflict you've been avoiding. The blessed life is not an easy life, but it is the only life that leads to true and lasting joy. It is the life found in him,